Hello and a very warm welcome to all the viewers of Detox. That is Disruptive Literacy Talks, and this is Tanmay Prakash, your host of this session. Detox aims at coming together in eradicating illiteracy and focusing upon the foundational literacy and numeracy, as committed under Sustainable Development Goal 4 and India's National Education Policy as well. Today's session will be based upon education and power of voice. And with this, I would like to introduce you with the speaker of the session. Mr. Kelly Marks, founder of Podcast Farm USA, and he will be speaking upon the topic educating a nation to the power of voices. Hello, sir. Welcome to Detox.
Hey, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, really.
And before starting the session, I would also like to tell our viewers about you. So, Mr. Kelly helps the world healers and the thought leaders to get their message through the popular and the growing medium of podcast. He works with spiritual teachers, coaches, doctors, entrepreneurs, and creative and business owners. With the medium of professional podcast, he explores human mind, heart, and spirit. He has a very dynamic personality with the skill of product development, product management, audio production, teaching, branding, and many more to count on. He has a training skill of elementary classroom. He also has a teaching skill of elementary classroom management. So, Mr. Kelly, as I said, you have a very dynamic personality, and we are very excited to hear you today in this session. And I hope we would have a very good session today.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think that we are going to develop some wonderful ideas that we can use to amplify the voices of India.
Wait. What did you just do? I just want to see that again.
I don't know what you're talking about. But yes, I know that we will be able to share some ideas, and really it is an honor here. And this does seem like quite an alarming situation, obviously after COVID. So to come together and brainstorm contributing ideas so that we can help empower the future generation is really inspiring. So thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you here. So you were talking about that you are going to give us some presentation. So we are looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall I share it now? All right, here. Just bear with me one moment. All right.
By the way, till the moment we are getting with the screen shared, so I would like to just ask you about one question in the beginning. That when did you decided to get in the field of podcast? What was your inspiration behind getting into the podcast? I mean, how did it started?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I actually homeschooled off and on throughout school, middle school and high school, and was always really interested in working with audio. And eventually when I was working with youth in audio engineering, and eventually I was working in the elementary school system, teaching music and electronic production, music production, and the students would go off into the corners of the rooms and interview each other and record each other. So they naturally were kind of podcasting. And it really planted a seed that, like, oh, this is something that's interesting to them. You know, every youth loves the microphone. They love to hear their voice amplified, and you know, they like to talk to each other. And so I think that really planted the idea that there was something more powerful about the platform that I hadn't really thought about. I also want to know, I'm trying to share the screen. Is there, maybe you need to allow me on your side to add it to stream? There we go. Okay, awesome. Yes. So to also go deeper into your question, when I've been raised around Vedic culture and within Hinduism since I was a baby. And I just wanted to bring up one point, which is that Vedic knowledge is also known as Shruti, or that which is received by hearing. And I think that the power of hearing cannot be understated. Like, all knowledge was orally passed down in the beginning, right? And then eventually we developed this amazing art form, this science, this technology of writing and literacy and being able to read and being able to pass ideas through paper. But in the beginning, it was all sound. And this is a quote from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Persons who are learned and who have true knowledge define sound as that which conveys the idea of an object, indicates the presence of a speaker, and constitutes the subtle form of ether. So sound is the most subtle element, and it is the primeval or the original cause of creation according to the Vedic scriptures. And, I want to give thanks to my teachers who have shared this knowledge with me, because it was through the Vedas and through India that I really found my passion and my purpose in life. And so now coming into touch with Detox, I pulled this information from your website, and I think it's just really important to recenter what is the problem, what is the challenge, what are we working on here? So to quote your website, the pandemic has reversed years of gains made in both access to and quality of foundational literacy and numeracy for children and adults. That totally makes sense. Same in the US, there's a whole wave of children who are just kind of lost. They didn't show up to class. They're being held back a grade or two. It's definitely a serious thing. Even the best techniques that were being used before the pandemic were already insufficient to fill the literacy gap. And now with the even more alarming situation of COVID, we'll need dramatically new solutions. And it is a learning crisis of global proportions. And I think it's happening in many countries. And I think India has so much wisdom and so many treasures to share with the entire world that while it is a crisis in Chinese is actually made up of two characters, which is danger and opportunity. So there is a danger here, but there's also an opportunity that's really important. And if we can seize it, then some beautiful things can happen. So you introduced me so amazingly, but why should anyone care about what I have to say? I'm the host also of Be On Air podcast. So I'm not just talking about podcasts. I have a podcast. We've done over 40 interviews with extraordinary guests. We've generated over $30,000 through the podcast. And I've had life-changing conversations that have transformed my life. They have changed the direction and the destiny of my life, all through hopping on a microphone and having conversations with people that interest me, inspire me, and who I have a genuine curiosity about. So you already introduced me. This is me here working with some students here in Texas in the US. So we are working on some exciting projects right now that I think would interest your listeners. We're bringing podcasting to organizations that work with survivors of human trafficking, because sharing their stories, sharing their voice, and also giving them tools to empower them financially is really important in preventing survivors from going back into the life. We're getting the podcasting curriculum into schools nationwide and internationally. We're in conversations with many different school districts on how to best implement a podcasting curriculum, an entrepreneurship curriculum into their programs. And we're also teaching young entrepreneurs how to monetize their intellectual property ideas and interests. So it's really exciting stuff. And this is carrying on some work from Sir Ken Robinson, who's a fantastic thinker. And he laid out some essential skills that students need in today's world: creativity, communication, teamwork, to be culturally literate. They need to be able to respond to other points of view and to empathize. They need to have good organization skills and, of course, discipline. These are essential skills in today's world. And all of these skills are cultivated through the platform of podcasting and entrepreneurship. And so this is a really exciting vehicle for these students to develop all of these skills. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is how podcasting is a vehicle for inquiry-based and self-directed learning. So by starting a podcast, these students are going to be able to find and use their voice. They're going to be able to discover their passions in a natural, organic way, because students need to be able to explore different things and try different things. And they need to access literacy and numeracy through their innate interests and passions, because you can apply literacy and numeracy to almost any subject, and it's so important for students to have ownership over their education. It allows them to build a network of mentors and peers. So what does that mean? having a circle of teachers and mentors, people who care about us and care about our well-being and share their knowledge freely with us, is imperative for the safety of youth. It's important that there are safe adults that are caring for our children and have their best interest in mind, and are passing on their wisdom so that that's not lost. And then, of course, it's really important to have a good community of peers, of equal of equals that we can share our experience with and learn from their experience and collaborate. Podcasting is perfect for this. They need to learn skills that are essential for working in the global marketplace. So technology, obviously literacy and numeracy, but then once you get there, how do you use technology? How do you market through social media? How do you communicate and organize projects online? All these things are really important now more than ever. And I think perhaps most importantly is to preserve and share India's extraordinary cultural, literary, and spiritual treasures. So India, as you know, has just an amazing wealth of knowledge and spiritual science and arts that are, I mean, extraordinary is the best word. They're astonishing. And I think that in order to continue to cultivate, to disseminate, and to preserve them, the podcasting platform is one of the best that I could think of. Here's some examples of how engaged students get. So you can see like something about the headphones and working with audio, working with each other. It fosters collaboration. It fosters critical thinking. There's so much that goes on in developing a single podcast. And the second thing I wanted to talk about is that the curriculum needs to be creative and fun, and it needs to let the students lead. The students need to be able to drive and direct their education. It gives them ownership, it gives them responsibility, and it empowers them to follow, again, their interests and their passions, which are ultimately going to help them be successful in whatever they do. And it empowers them to explore themselves and their world. Again, so important to let students follow their own inner guidance as far as what they want to get out of their life. And it gives them job and career opportunities, because if they follow their passion, it will lead to profit eventually. If we follow our passion, we will find our purpose, and it will bring us profit. And again, it's going to connect them with mentors and peers. And one really exciting aspect of podcasting that I want all teachers, if you're a teacher or superintendent, if you're a director of school, how do you assess if learning has taken place? And the standard way is standardized tests, but we know that is not the best way to actually judge if a student is learning. There's so many other ways. Not all students are good at taking tests. So by creating a podcast, it's sort of a report. The students have to create this artifact of learning and demonstrate everything that they have consumed that semester. And it forces them to kind of tie in all the skills that they've learned into a single product. So as far as assessment goes, podcastings go way beyond tests. Another point that I wanted to bring up with you all is that entrepreneurship empowers students, and it gives them a grounded context to their education. It gives them a big picture. Why are we learning numeracy? Why are we learning math? Why are we learning language? Why are we learning how to write and read? Well, we want to have more choices. If we can have financial empowerment, if we have an education, we can earn more for our family and community, and we can have more choices as to what we do in life. It gives us more freedom and more autonomy. And it also gives us, again, it connects us to our passions. Well, if I'm going to learn math, I want to learn math so that I can do something that I care about, not just because someone tells me I need math. So connecting those dots for them is so important. And if the students get this, the community benefits. So the students building their own entrepreneurial enterprise will benefit everyone around it. It'll bring in abundance. It'll bring in prosperity to the community. And of course, it's going to teach them all the 21st century skills. We've talked about this. And perhaps even more importantly is emotional intelligence. In order to interview people like we're doing right here, you have to have a certain level of emotional intelligence. You have to be able to listen and reflect and inquire and have rapport with someone. And all these things are going to help them greatly in their communities and in the world, is to have this emotional intelligence. Entrepreneurship is an amazing vehicle for that. And as an example, I produced this. This is a digital product. We have earned over $60,000 from a single digital product. I'm talking about audio files. These are audio files. I went and traveled throughout India and recorded master raga musicians, and we put together a sample pack. So by learning how to work with audio and technology, these students can do things like this, and they can generate income. This is proof. I'm not just saying this as like a fantasy. You can create income with the skills that you learn from podcasting. And what is a podcast? Well, podcast is episodic audio content, meaning content that comes out regularly. And there's different kinds of podcasts. There's an interview-based podcast, like what we're doing right now. This is an interview-based podcast. It's a talk show, right? It is a exchange of ideas. It's a conversation. But then there's a solo cast, which is more like a journal log. So students can document their experience, document their learning, just document their life as if it was a journal, and just speak. And that is really good for their own mental health and their own emotional processing. There's also stories and audio dramas. So, having different characters, having different voices. There's so many epics of India, like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. There's so many rich things that the students could explore that would teach them reading. And it would also apply so well to this platform. And then the editorial reports, investigative podcasting, where they go out, find a cause or find an issue, and they gather data, and they gather little clips of media and audio and video from different sources, and they weave it together through editing to tell a story, much like a reporter. And those skills are extremely valuable, and politically that can be a really valuable asset for the youth of India. And then, of course, showcasing the music, arts, and culture. So having musicians, having dancers, having discussions with different experts in Indian culture. It's a great way to preserve it. It's a great way to amplify it. And it's a great way for the youth to reconnect with their own roots in ways that they may not have been able to. Those are just a few podcast types. But the basic premise is that by starting a podcast, you are starting a business. You are starting a brand. And so we're enabling these students students and adults, to try a safe business idea that has the ability to generate revenue, but it's not such a risk to start as buying a building and trying to sell fabric or food or anything, right? So it's a safe way for students to explore starting a business and brand. And again, it's been proven that these students, I've seen it again and again, they get so excited on the microphone. And to quote Sir Ken Robinson, the goal should be to connect students with their capacities, interests, and passions, and to understand the world within them. And by using their voice, in the Vedas, it said Om it emanates from the heart. It rises Aum, right? So they need to understand the world within them. By using their voice, they're actually connecting with the source of their consciousness, with their soul. And it can't be understated. Readers are leaders. We need more leaders, and we need more leaders from India, because India has, again, a treasure trove of wisdom, arts, and just amazing thinkers. And it's imperative that we come together and figure out different solutions globally. So thank you so much for letting me share that.
It was a great presentation by you, Mr. Kelly, and the ideas which you shared was really amazing. That was, they were really amazing. That on making the students entrepreneur, making them self-dependent is also a very great idea, which I think in the future can help us in developing more skills in our students. So, like you work for the podcast, and so how do you feel that podcast is a very effective medium or a very effective source in the field of education and literacy? How can we bring more changes in the field of literacy and education to the medium of podcast, to the medium of voice?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is turning a microphone on in front of students, to start there and not worry about having this or whatever, but just like using a phone and letting people record their voice, and starting to collect stories, and starting to have them collect stories. And just by doing that, it's really powerful, because what happens when you record audio is you can then generate transcripts. And what is that? Is then you have to read it. So let's say someone who can't read or write, they can speak. They speak, then they generate a transcript. They can learn to read their own language. They can learn to read their own words, right? It's also a way for them to learn a language. You can learn a language through audio and not read or write. You can learn
Hmm.
skills through audio and not read or write. So it's not to replace literacy and numeracy, but it is maybe before it, right? Before learning how to read and write, you can hear. And so we can serve people who haven't developed those skills yet through audio. And I think that's really powerful. I mean, the ideas there are endless, how that could serve, this crisis in India right now.
And what do you think that how can a medium of voice can the medium of voice be the most cheapest and the best source of education and literacy as well, to bring the world onto a single platform, not into if we talk about educating, we can bring world on a single platform with the medium of podcast.
Yeah, it's a good question. I lived in Mexico for 8 years, and we had a program there where we were developing youth mentor networks, and we wanted to develop sort of a school, a micro school, where the students could learn from teachers, and we wanted to do it without money, with no money. So we came up with an idea of doing barter or an exchange with time. So we had a recording studio, and I would record musicians from the town in exchange for the musicians teaching the youth from the rural village. And then the youth would work on the land doing organic agriculture and reforestation and ecological conservation. And that, so no money was exchanged, but everyone got something out of it. We were working on the land and developing the land. The students were getting music education, and the musicians were getting to record their music. So similarly, creating these mentor networks with youth and having the platform of voice and audio is valuable. It's valuable for everyone involved, because the platform allows you to market, it allows you to get news out. One of the problems that we ran into in Mexico was getting messages to all the students, because it was very rural. Many of them didn't have any electricity. Many of them didn't have phones. So how do you do a bulletin? Or no, a lot of them had phones, oddly enough, but they didn't have internet and they didn't have power. For whatever reason, people get a lot of access to phones, right? We needed a way to get in touch with them. And I hadn't really encountered podcasting at that time, but podcasting is a really powerful tool for communities to stay in touch, for companies, schools, and communities to stay in touch. So here's another idea for any educators out there and any teachers to make a podcast for your organization and use that as a way to communicate with everyone and keep the team kind of mobilized under a central vision, right? It's a way to have these values and the mission statement of the company disseminated through to everyone, and also to make everyone feel part of it, right? So you're actually speaking, because it's so personal to have a voice in the microphone and you're in someone's ears, so you're right there with them. There's no barriers. There's not even air. You're just listening to me into your ears, and so it's a very intimate platform, and it allows you to create this sense of community just through audio.
Yeah. So I would like to take a question from the live chat, which Mr. Mashood Alam Bhatt has posted. He says that exposing kids at a young age to multiple languages evidently improves their cognitive capacities. Can podcast be used to help kids learn different languages from an early age?
Absolutely, right. Audio courses. It's an amazing opportunity to teach English, to teach. How many languages are there in India? There's so many, and to really help students master their own language and then start to branch out and learn, Hindi, Bengali, learn the other Oriya, learn these other languages that are so important to India, and keep them relevant, keep them part of their expression. But then, of course, learning international languages and dialects that will help them in their career. Podcasting is going to be amazing for that. Audio is going to be amazing for that, because it bypasses needing to read.
Yes. And how about connecting youth to the medium of podcast to work for the cause of literacy and numeracy? Like we can bring the students who are going to school, bring on a platform of podcast, and let them share their views about education and literacy, how they feel when they are getting educated in the schools, to the children who are the out of the school children. What are your views on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Would you mind reframing that one more time?
Yeah. So basically, what about bringing the school going kids onto the medium of podcast
Hmm.
to share their experiences to the students who are the out of the school children, who are not being given an opportunity to go schools?
Yeah,
So
this is
would
great.
it be an inspiring thing?
Yeah, the idea of the mentor net of the peer network. It's so important to have a peer support, right? People at our same level. Mentors are a little bit above us, teaching us. We need to have people at our level. And so for this, for students who are not in school,
Hmm.
it's so good for them to hear from other kids or adults even their age. It's really good for us to hear from people who are like us about their experience. So if maybe they're not interested in school or they don't know all the benefits, to have a podcast that's sort of centered around the kind of learning that goes on
Hmm.
would
Hmm.
definitely give a window to those. I think that's a great idea. And then also, the the folks, the people who are in communities and don't have the access to education, to literacy and numeracy, they have knowledge and lived experiences that are very valuable and are educational for the kids in school or the adults in school, right? So just because they don't have literacy and numeracy doesn't mean that they don't have something. And so it promotes an exchange. So if there's a conversation between the two, then this exchange can happen where the knowledge is passed back and forth. And I think that enriches everyone's life, honestly.
Yeah, because a person of my age, if he shares about his experience of his field, it might also let me think upon that. Yes, I should also do this, and this would also help the kids to step out of their comfort zone and getting into the field of education and gaining the education and and doing what the things they want in the future. So and moving on. Uh, Share your views on the power of podcast and online media for an online movement.
Yeah, I mean, when COVID hit the world, if you weren't online, it was time to get online. It was like no more waiting. Everyone needs to get online. And so we can't really go back from that now. We're all online. It's going to be something different now moving forward. And so there is a ton of potential. A lot of people think that podcasts, there's too many podcasts. There's no reason to start a new podcast. There's actually so few podcasts compared to YouTube channels, let's say. There's millions and millions of YouTube channels, and there's maybe a million podcasts, at least US based. There might be more, but it's by orders of magnitude much smaller. So podcasts, for whatever reason, are still in development and are still up and coming, and so it's a really good time to leverage the platform. Then there's other apps like Clubhouse that have just come out. Clubhouse is an audio only chat app that is really powerful. It's really powerful to connect with people all across the world, different industries, and share ideas and resources. And so I believe podcasting is the easiest ramp to get online, because if you just go and try and create a social media account and you try and create a website, you're going to have a hard time monetizing. You're going to have a hard time getting the word out. But if you start with a podcast, it's so simple in a way. It's just you and a microphone and a hosting company. That's all you really need to start a podcast. You, a microphone, and a hosting company. Talk about stuff you love. Talk about people you love. Things that interest you, things that anger you. Talk about those things. And what will happen is people start to gravitate towards that. You'll attract your community. And then from that, collaborations, clients, partnerships, ideas can start to form and the conversation can develop. So the online world is saturated right now with marketing people, with course creators, with so much knowledge, but still everyone has room to build their own community. And we really only need like 1,000 true fans of our work to support ourselves, support our communities with through online. So if we can mobilize 1,000 people around our idea, around our cause, around our solution to a problem, then we're going to have a really good chance of being successful in our endeavor.
So as you said, as you mentioned that there is YouTube and YouTube, there is much more things on YouTube, and podcast is a developing medium. So if we talk about education and literacy, so there are more material on YouTube and as compared to podcast. So how do you think podcast is a more competitive medium
Yeah.
than YouTube or
Yeah.
any other OTT platform?
It's interesting because I think video, I think the word podcast is limiting because, it came about because of Apple iPod, right? And so it was a podcast. And now, even if you're not on an Apple device, it's a podcast. The truth of the matter is, it's about amplifying our voice. And whether we do that with video or without video, if we do it just through writing in a book, if we do it just going out on the street and yelling, hey, we grab one of these. This is a podcast. If I go out on the street and so we're just trying to amplify. We're trying to amplify our consciousness. Each individual is trying to amplify themselves. So video is so powerful because it's engaging multiple senses, and you can only, certain things you can only see. However, audio is even more natural. If you think about it, when we're in the womb, in our mother's womb, we don't really see anything, but we hear. We hear our mom before we see her. So sound is that very first kind of connection with the world. And it's less taxing on the nervous system. So right now I'm talking to you and I see me and I see you and there's stuff going around and I have to look at the camera and think about all this stuff, right? I'm like, I have to like look nice and get good clothes on and lighting, all this stuff. It's complicated, right?
Yeah, one will be more conscious when coming onto the camera.
Exactly. The consciousness, some people just will not go on camera. So many reasons. However, audio is a little bit more relaxing. You can kind of be there in your pajamas. You can focus more on just the information and the sound that's coming out. And so it's less information in a sense. It's less data being passed through. And I think that there's power in that. And some people are more audio learners, some people are more visual learners, some people are more kinesthetic learners, right? So there's different learning styles, and audio could be really powerful for certain kinds of learners, whereas video might be more powerful for others.
Yeah, and if we talk about audio, so I think audio also builds an imagining power in a person. Like if you say a story on your podcast, and then a person will automatically start imagining the things that if and the scenarios. So what are your views, like how in the future podcast can also be a very good source of telling the stories to story to a person, or sharing your ideas?
I love the point you brought up, that it helps cultivate imagination and creativity, right? Because you're forced to use that function of your brain of visualizing. And so, I think that's a really great point. I think storytelling is extremely powerful. Obviously, the Vedas are full of histories and stories of extreme importance, and that holds so much truth, right? So a story can be true even if a story isn't a historical story. So even if it's a metaphor or a myth or a parable, there's a truth in it that is so valuable. And telling the story and telling our story, it can be really therapeutic as well, right? So telling stories is the way that our brain organizes information, the narrative structure. And because podcasting or audio or video is time-based, it goes left to right or left to right. It forces us to organize our thoughts. It forces us to arrange our information, very much like a report, very much like a presentation, right? So if I were just like to come here, I need to organize my thoughts. What's the point I'm trying to say? Where's my beginning? Where's my middle? Where's my end? Beginning, middle, end. So going back to Om, it's like the source of existence is sound, and it is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it is that cycle. And so it's the greatest story ever told, as far as I'm concerned.
And moving on, as we know that in the pandemic time, all the schools were closed worldwide. Do you think radio and the medium of podcast would help the teachers and the trainers to reach their students in a more effective and an efficient manner?
I mean, certainly. I think that there's many ways it could be approached. I think if teachers, one way, every teacher could start a podcast and have their students contribute to it. And that would give the students a huge sense of excitement and responsibility and ownership over their learning in the classroom, right? If they know that they're going to have an episode on the air, on the radio, like that's very exciting. Most people are excited by that. And at the same time, it will help the teachers show their supervisors the learning that has occurred, right? So that benefits the school system and the educators in sharing the learning that has occurred rather than just test scores. Here's like 10 episodes of my students learning and in-depth interviews with their grandparents about, you know, their history. And so there's just so many ways that you can use the format of audio storytelling to empower them. And radio and podcasts are virtually the same thing now. You know, you can syndicate your podcast onto the radio stations worldwide. So the bridge there is really it's not a very long bridge. It's like right there. And I think radio is still really powerful, right? Because even if you don't have a phone, you can tune into radio. So I think, you know, in especially rural communities where technology is sparse, radio is a great option. And the more that we can pump out valuable wisdom and information through the airwaves. I mean, there's so much static, there's so much negativity being broadcast out through the planet, through the airwaves, right? So the more that we can put out positivity and the more we can put out educational content that's going to serve people is really helping the planet. We're literally putting that out through the airwaves as vibrations.
Yeah, basically you raised a very good point that we can like have things we can bring positivity into the atmosphere by using the education and spiritual things. And I as you raised the thing that now radio and podcast are coming together. So many of the radio stations now also play podcast, famous podcast, and there are many shows like podcast hours and everything. So that, yeah, that is a great thing which in future we can see. Now I would like to take a question from the chat that internet is required for the people to access the podcast, and it becomes really very difficult to reach a wider audience if internet is not available. So what are your views on it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That is totally a challenge and an obstacle. I think that there's a couple different ways that could be handled. I mean, we were talking about radio. I think radio is powerful because you just need a little radio. I think more people have access to radio. So through the medium of podcasting, you can syndicate that same audio throughout radio stations. That's one way. But even if you do a podcast and you bring speakers to a town, right? So if you have these, one of the organizations I worked with was really big on grassroots peer counseling. So you have peers go out into the rural villages with the tech and they teach that way. So you do need some intermediary person to bring the tech, right? And so if we're talking about areas that have no access to electricity and internet, that would probably be one solution. But let's go back to the literacy thing. Again, a podcast is language. It's a conversation potentially, and it's an interview that can be done through writing. So students without access to internet and audio can do the same thing as like a blog or as a journal, a zine, a magazine, right? These are all similar formats. They're episodic content. So I think that might be a good solution for people who have no access to technology, is to try and, once learning the basics of writing, to try and document things, to try and write about things. And even if it was using photos and drawings and captions, making like a picture book, like those are in essence podcasts, little mini podcasts. So those are some ideas, but it's a problem. It's a challenge and an obstacle and something to continue to brainstorm about how to solve. But we have to look forward 7 generations too, seven generations forward. It's not hard to believe that almost everyone on the planet will have access to some level of technology. Even just looking at the last 50 years, how much it's changed. So if we're thinking in the future, and planning for future generations, I think it's highly likely that there'll be more access to tech than ever before.
Yes, exactly. 50 years ago, people wouldn't have thought of having a mobile phone or listening to audio on their mobile or listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
So I would like to take next question from the chat, and that is how to introduce podcast to novice like a child in a slum or an adult in a village. How to
Yeah.
get to them.
Well, so there's two, maybe I'm not 100% sure I understand the direction of the question. One way would be how to introduce just listening to podcasts, right? And the easiest way is find a great one that you like and put it on a phone and give them some headphones and let them listen. That's one way. How to introduce them to podcasting, to making podcasts. I always start, and I encourage anyone listening, even if you're just sitting there right now, if you want to grab a pen and paper, this is a really fun exercise that you can do at home and that you could share with any person that you ever meet, which is to write down on a piece of paper. Now, it's really important that you don't filter your thoughts here. You don't want to limit your thoughts. There's no wrong answers. There's no dumb answers. And it doesn't even matter like if you are going to use any of these ideas. So it's really important. It's brainstorming. Open our mind, write down everything that you love, every topic that you love, everything that you like doing, even if it's just, kind of like it, really like it, write down everything you love, all your interests, all your passions, right? Everything you've done that matters to you. And then on another piece of paper, write down everyone who's inspired you, anyone who has educated you and given you gifts, anyone, role models and heroes, right? Like write down people who really inspire you. Those people, if you could talk to them, you want to make sure that there's some people on there that you feel it's impossible to talk to. And by building this list of your interests and passions and people who inspire you and motivate you, you have the basis for a podcast, right? So even if you were just corresponding with those people through writing, you could build an interview blog. You could do many things, right? And having that map, then you can go through and get rid of topics that don't really, you can organize the topics and see what kind of main categories come out. And with topics and guests and a phone, you can record a podcast. You have topics, you have guests, you have a phone. You can then start to have conversations with those people about those topics. And it's a really powerful combination. I hope that helps a little bit.
And as we all know that podcast is a medium of mass communication. So how about bringing the underprivileged people to the medium of podcast and let them share their problems, their innovations, and their way of solving problems, which can reach to an n number of audience. We can reach the n number of audience, and I think the problem can be solved. So what are your views upon that?
Yeah, I think just giving them a microphone and letting them share their ideas. Absolutely. I think we need to hear from more people, more different, diverse people from different backgrounds. It's all about collaboration. I think moving forward, going back to those 21st century skills that I mentioned, that all students need is, collaboration, communication, teamwork. We need to be able to organize ourselves and share ideas, and just like we're doing now, like this, what is happening right now is a podcast, and what is happening right now is an example of how beneficial this platform can be. We can share ideas. There's people commenting thank you, I'm so glad you're enjoying the session. There's people commenting and sharing ideas and asking really good questions that are making me think about things I wasn't thinking about, making you think about things. And so we are actually having a global conversation. We are combining our intelligences and our consciousness to further an idea, and it's like parallel processing. It's like building a supercomputer, super consciousness, and it's really powerful.
So my last question to you, that I have been hearing from you. I have also been reading about you that you always say that one should amplify their inner self. One should always amplify their ideas. So what does it means?
Yeah, amplify what
I'm very keen to know that.
Yeah, amplify what you love is sort of my motto, and it goes back to Om, actually, because Om comes from the heart. It starts in the heart, and our soul is situated in the heart. And so my belief that if we focus on what we love and we amplify it, we focus on it, we turn the volume up, it will lead us to our purpose in life. It'll lead us to our vocation. It'll lead us to that which we're good at, the world pays us, the world needs. It'll lead us to that intersection of what we are meant to do. And ultimately, that will lead to prosperity for our communities, for ourselves, for the world. So by focusing on what we love and amplifying it, we can actually create change.
Okay, so I would like to tell my viewers that Mr. Kelly has some surprise for us. But before that, Mr. Kelly, I would love to share some insights about us. What we do at Global Dream Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Project. So with this, I would like to share some insights and a small brief, I could say, that what we do over here. So basically, we have a literacy material known as Global Dream Toolkit. If you can see this on the screen I've shared. So moving on further. So this is the introduction page where I would like to tell you that we teach the children from their existing knowledge, not giving our insights to them, but telling them, teaching them from their knowledge. And also for teaching them, one should not be a teacher. A school going child could also be his or her mentor. And moving on further, like we have some pictorial representations in the page, if you can see. So if we take the first image, that is violin and apple and a nest. So we ask the child that what is the first sound of violin. So he will say ver. And then we'll ask the what's the first apple of what's the first sound of apple. So he'll say a. And then when we ask him that what is the first sound of nest, so he will say n. So va and n. So he will start to pronounce van. So by this way, if a child or if an underprivileged children is not literate enough to read this or identify these words, he can surely identify and start reading and learning these words, and which initially will also give him the confidence of getting educated. So, and rather than this, uh, we at Global Dream has a vision of a world in which every person is empowered with the skill of foundational literacy and numeracy, as we said earlier. Our mission is to mobilize a movement for literacy for all. We provide education to the out of school children and the underprivileged adults. And as also mentioned earlier, we have a literacy material known as Toolkit, which is right now published in 12 different Indian languages such as Hindi, Bihari, Punjabi, Marathi, Manipuri, and etc. So this is some insight of what we at Global Dream do.
That's so inspiring. I want some of those booklets so I can learn Hindi and Bengali.
Very sure, very sure. We'll be providing you.
And you know what was interesting about that? Going back to the Srimad Bhagavatam verse is Artha Shrai, the shelter of meaning. So you're using sound, the sound of violin, va, to help teach literacy, right? So the sound is that, you can connect first with the sound and then with the reading of the letter and the character. So I just found that so fascinating.
Yeah. So now we are looking forward for your surprise.
Yes, I wanted to share with the audience 3 treasures that I have learned from India. So
Okay,
bear with me here. All right, you should be able to see. Can you hear okay?
Yeah.
There are 3 treasures that I learned from India throughout my life. The first is guru, or the teacher. The second is the teachings, or the shastra, the dharma, the shruti. And the last is the sangha, or the community. And these 3 are equally important and always together. Even if the teacher disappears from our vision. These three are always together and are always one. Even in times when the teachings are lost, right? Obscured by time, these three are always together and are always one.
That's great.
And like we saw with COVID, the community, the sangha was separated. Kids couldn't hang out with each other, couldn't play. Even if teachings are obscured, and even if the teacher leaves this earth, we should always remember that these three things are always together and are always one. Those are the three gems of India. So thank you so much for your time. This has been really amazing to get to speak with you all.
This was really amazing. And the way you showed it to us was really amazing. And people would also want to know that how Mr. Kelly did that. While keeping that one stone into his pocket, and then again it was there in his hand again. So yeah, you explained it in a very well manner, and I hope the audience, the people out there listening to us or viewing us, would have gained many things from this session. And so finally, moving on, we come to the end of this session of detox, and with this, we absolutely come to an end of this session. And we would I would like to thank Mr. Kelly to coming onto this session and sharing such wonderful insights or such wonderful thoughts to us, from which we really got to learn many things. So thank you so much, Mr. Kelly, to giving us your time.
It was my pleasure. And I just want to invite all your viewers and listeners to check out the podcast, Be On Air podcast. It's on all platforms, YouTube, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. It's everywhere. And if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn more, check us out online at podcast-farm.com.
Sure. And to learn more about Global Dreams 30 Hours Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Approach, log into www.globaldream.guru, or you can also WhatsApp us on 740-840-6000. With this, I would again like to thank Mr. Kelly for coming to our session and telling us such wonderful things. And also, I would like to thanks to all our lovely audience for their kind support. Thank you and have a nice day.
Namaste.
Namaste.